Imagine you're underground, no phone signal, no sunlight. The air smells like cold chalk and something you can't quite name. Like wet iron, like old stone, like time itself rotting. You've got a flashlight, a map, and the absolute rock solid confidence that you know exactly where you are. You don't. And somewhere ahead of you, just around the next corner, just past the reach of your light, there are 6 million people who would like a word. Welcome to the Phantom Navigator. I'm your host, and tonight we are going down. Way, way down. You're listening to the Phantom Navigator, the show where we go to places history tried to bury and paranormal science can't quite explain, where folklore meets forensic, where your rational mind and your survival instincts have a very public argument. Tonight's episode, The Empire of the Dead, or Catacombs, History, Mysteries, and more. We are going on a global tour of the world's catacombs, those underground labyrinths that every major civilization on every continent quietly filled with their dead, and then even more quietly stopped talking about. We're talking 6 million bones in Paris, 2,500 kilometers of illegal tunnels in Ukraine, a 2-year-old girl in Palermo who looks like she is absolutely just sleeping and has been for over 100 years old, a donkey in Egypt that accidentally discovered one of 7 wonders of the Middle Ages, and a note left behind in an illegal underground cinema that simply read, "Ne cherchez pas." Don't search. We're going to search. Let's start in Paris, because of course we do. Paris, the city of love, the city of light, the city of, and I cannot stress this enough, absolutely catastrophic corpse management. Here's the thing about Paris in the 1700s that tourism boards would really prefer you to not think about. The city was stinking of death. Literally. The most famous cemetery in Paris, the Cimetière, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, like I usually do, sorry. Cimetière des Innocents, had been accepting bodies for 10 centuries. 10 centuries. It was so overstuffed that in 1786, a cellar wall in a neighboring building collapsed under the literal weight of rotting corpses pressing against it from the other side. The neighbors were not thrilled. So Paris did what any reasonable city does when it runs out of room for its dead. It went down beneath the city where hundreds of miles of abandoned limestone quarries, the same quarries that had provided the stone to build Paris above, and from 1785 to 1814, every single night, black draped wagons would move through the streets carrying remains from overflowing cemeteries, and priests would walk alongside them, chanting prayers in the dark. At night, in silence, through the streets of a city that had no idea what was rolling past, 6 million people eventually delivered underground like some kind of Gothic postal service. But here's where it gets interesting. In 1810, a man named Louis Etienne Perdicart de Thury decided that a massive underground pit of anonymous human remains was not, in fact, how Paris should present itself to the world. So he did something extraordinary. He turned it into art. He and his workers stacked skulls into archways. They arranged femurs into decorative patterns, geometric, almost beautiful. They built altars out of tibias. They created urns made entirely of human bones, and throughout the tunnels he placed plaques, stone tablets engraved with philosophical quotes about morality, about time, about the nature of human life. He turned a dumping ground into a museum. A museum of death, created, landscape, visited. And I want to sit with that just for a second, because what Perdicart de Thury did was ask the most human question there is. If we have to be surrounded by the dead, how do we make it beautiful? The answer, apparently, is geometric skull arrangements, which honestly, respectable. Now, the official Paris catacombs that you can tour, that's about 2 kilometers. A tidy, well-lit, gift shop adjacent slice of underground history. The actual network, somewhere between 300 and 500 kilometers of tunnels. Most of it unmapped, all of it illegal to enter without permission, and yet, people going anyways. They call themselves cataphiles, and they have been sneaking into the Paris underground for decades, building a subculture so rich that it has its own language, its own etiquette, its own legends. And the legends are something. First, La Dame Blanche, the woman in white. Unlike the elegant Victorian ghost you probably imagining, floaty, gauzy, tasteful, this one is described as noblewoman who fled into the tunnels to escape the guillotine during the Revolution. She is seen in the unmapped wild sections. She doesn't speak, she simply appears, translucent, silent, and points, always towards dead ends, always away from the exit. She wasn't trying to survive. She's just really committed to making sure you don't either. Then there's the Revolutionary Sentinel, a soldier, sometimes in a ragged revolutionary uniform, sometimes in Royal Guard armor, standing absolutely still in a hallway far from any public area. He doesn't move. He doesn't speak. Explorers who get close enough report that he vanishes, but he leaves something behind, a heaviness, a suffocating, chest-pressing heaviness that triggers immediate irrational panic. Whether it's a ghost or the result of thin air and deep darkness playing tricks on a frightened human brain, I'll leave that up to you. And then there's one that gets me. The crying child. In the ailent, deep galleries, pedophiles report hearing it. The sound of a child sobbing, moving from wall to wall, impossible to locate. The theory, and this is historical, not invented, is that during a massive bone transfer of the 18th century, children's remains were separated from their families and dumped anonymously into communal pits. The sound, according to those who've heard it, doesn't fade when you move towards it. It moves away from you. An echo of separation that has lasted 300 years. But perhaps the most famous Paris Catacombs story isn't a ghost at all. It's a video. In the 1990s, a camcorder was found deep in the tunnel network. The footage shows a man exploring. He seems fine, then confused, then running. He's sprinting through narrow corridors, the light bouncing off skull walls, his breath getting louder, more ragged, and then the camera drops. It keeps recording. It records the floor, the empty tunnel, the silence. The man was never found. Now, was it staged? Was it real? Nobody knows. But here's where things that make it undeniable as a piece of legend. Nobody came back for the camera. Whoever left it, left it. And then in 2004, Paris police received a tip about illegal underground complex. They found, and I want you to really hear this, they found a 400 square meter cinema carved from the limestone. Full bar, dining area, professional grade screening rooms with seats cut directly into the rock, pirated electricity from the city above. Some group had built a secret movie theater under Paris, and they'd been operating it, presumably for years, without anyone knowing. 3 days later, police returned to trace the electrical wiring. The equipment was gone. In the floor, a single handwritten note. Ne chargez pas. Don't search. Before we leave Paris, we have to talk about Philibert Aspairt, because Philibert is generally one of history's most relatable cautionary tales. In 1793, Philibert was a doorman. He worked at a hospital above the catacombs, and one night, allegedly, he heard a rumor about a secret passage that connected to the Valhalla of bad ideas, a liquor cellar. Philibert grabbed a candle, one candle, and he went in. His body was found 11 years later his body was found 11 years later. 11 years he had been wandering or had ended just feet from an exit he could not find in the dark. He is now the patron saint of the cataphiles. They celebrate his memory every year on the anniversary of his death. There is a plaque on the spot where he was found, and every year, I imagine someone stands at that plaque and thinks, I won't make Philibert's mistake. And then they go in, their flashlight, their map, their confidence, and the tunnels quietly wait. If Paris is the accidental city of the dead, Rome is the intentional one. The Roman catacombs were not the result of a municipal overflow crisis. They were purpose-built. Starting in the 2nd century, Christians and Jews carved them into tufa, a soft volcanic rock that is, as it happens, incredibly easy to dig through. Because Roman law forbids burial within city walls, and open land was expensive, and they needed somewhere sacred to put their dead. What they built is, by any measure, extraordinary. Multi-level labyrinths, hundreds of miles of corridors if you stretch them end to end. Carved into volcanic rock with hand tools, lit only by oil lamps and recesses carved into the same walls that held the dead. The San Callisto Catacombs alone contains what scholars have called Little Vatican, a crypt housing that remains of 9 early popes, 9 in a row, in the same underground room. There is a pope graveyard beneath Rome, and is absolutely on brand for a city that has never once been accused of understatement. And then there is the myth of Saint Cecilia. In 1599, her tomb was opened, and what workers reportedly found inside was a body that appeared after 15 centuries, perfectly preserved, not mummified, not skeletal, preserved, like she was sleeping. The sculptor Stefano Maderno was brought in, and he was so overwhelmed that he was so overwhelmed by what he saw that he carved a statue, a life-size marble figure, in her exact position, eyes closed, head turned to the side, one hand resting open, fingers curled as if she just released something. The statue still exists. You can see it. In a myth, one that catacomb guides whisper is that her spirit never left, that Cecilia, patron saint of music, still lingers in the underground, and that visitors who walk those tunnels in true silence, not the performed silence of tourism, but the real silence of listening, sometimes hears it. A melody, a faint, distant, coming from nowhere. Now, I don't know if you believe in ghosts or not, but I do know that some rooms have a weight to them. Some silences sound like something. And a woman who was beautiful enough that sculptors couldn't bear to look away, even after 1500 years, is exactly the kind of spirit who would stay. All right, we need to talk about Palermo, because what's happening in Capuchin Catacombs of Sicily is, and I say this with full sincerity and only a little horror, the most Italian thing that has ever happened. In Paris, they piled the bones anonymously. In Rome, they laid the dead in stone niches. In Palermo, they dressed them. The Capuchin monks of Palermo developed a mummification technique called the collatio method. The body would be placed in a drying room for approximately 1 year, arranged so that fluids could drain completely. Then, and I want you to appreciate the commitment here, The body would be washed in vinegar, stuffed with straw, and dressed in its finest clothes. Priests went into their robes, aristocrats in silk, children in their Sunday best. And then they were displayed upright in corridors organized by social class. There are separate hallways for professionals, doctors, and lawyers. There's a corridor for women, a corridor for virgins, and a corridor for priests. Death in Palermo has a dress code. Families would visit regularly. They would check on their relatives, and when the clothes became tattered, they would come back with fresh ones and redress the mummies. Visiting the dead wasn't morbid, it was social. But of all the 8,000 bodies in the Capuchin catacombs, there is one that stops every single visitor in their tracks. Her name is Rosalia Lombardo. She died in 1920. She was 2 years old. Her father, General Mario Lombardo, was so consumed by grief that he commissioned the most celebrated embalmer of the era, a man named Alfredo Solafia, to preserve her. And what Solafia accomplished is, from a scientific standpoint, staggering. He injected into her femoral artery for formula that remained secret for almost 90 years. In 2009, a researcher found Salafia's own handwritten notes, and the recipe was finally revealed. Formula: to halt bacterial decay, zinc salts, the critical ingredient, which essentially petrified her organs, turning them into a stone-like consistency that would hold their shape forever. Alcohol, to dry the tissues. Don't know why I'm having a hard time saying that one. Salicylic acid, to prevent mold and fungi. Glycerin, to keep her skin supple, to prevent it from becoming leather. And then, this detail from more recent studies, Salafia may have also injected paraffin wax dissolved in ether into her face to keep her cheeks plump, to keep her looking like a child who had only just fallen asleep. She has been described as the most perfectly preserved mummy in the world. Her skin is still soft-looking. Her blonde hair is still visible. Her eyelids are not fully closed. And that last detail is where the legend begins. There is a time-lapsed video shot through the glass of her case in the catacombs. And in that video, her eyes appear to open and close. Scientists have explained it. The light through the side window, changing through the day, catches the blue in her irises at different angles. The eyelids, not fully shut, create the illusion of movement. It is, they say, an optical illusion. It looks like she's sleeping, not dead, not preserved, not 104 years gone. Sleeping. Like at any moment she might shift, might exhale, might open those blue eyes and look directly at you through the glass. the uncanny valley, the psychological horror of something almost human, but not quite, has a face in the Capuchin Catacombs of Palermo. And her name was Rosalia. I wonder if some way we were related since we have the same last name. Let's go to Alexandria, Egypt, 1900. And let's start with my favorite accidental archaeological discovery in human history. A donkey fell through the ground. Just fell. A donkey walking along, minding its own business, and the earth opened up beneath it and swallowed it into a massive, multi-tiered underground burial complex that would later be classified as one of the 7 wonders of the Middle Ages. The site is called el Shakafa, which translates to magnificently to mound of shards. The name comes from the thousands of broken clay jars found at the entrance. In antiquity, it was considered deeply bad luck to bring a jar home after a funeral feast held in the catacombs, so visitors would smash the jars at the exit. Thousands of them, over centuries, until they had created an actual mountain of pottery. They were so superstitious about bringing death home with them, so careful to leave the grief underground, that they ritually destroyed the vessels that had held their food at the threshold. I find that profoundly human and profoundly heartbreaking. el Shakafa is architecturally one of the strongest places on earth. It was built during the period of Roman rule over Egypt, and whoever designed it apparently received conflicting memos about the aesthetic. The result is a site where Egyptian mythology collides head-on with Greco-Roman design in a way that is simultaneously magnificent and deeply, wonderfully confused. Case in point, there is a relief carved into a wall, Anubis, the jackal-headed god of death, protector of the dead. Ancient and powerful and unmistakable. He is wearing a Roman soldier's uniform. He is holding a Roman spear. Anubis is the legionnaire, god of death, serving the empire. 2,000 years of theological identity crisis carved into the volcanic rock for us to stare at. There is also a hall, the Hall of Caracalla, that contains a mass grave. Historians believe that Roman Emperor Caracalla ordered a massacre of the youth of Alexandria in 215 AD, and their remains, along with their horses, were dumped there hostilely, anonymously, buried in the same sacred space Alexandrians has used for generations. In the lowest level of el Shakafa, the deepest tier is permanently flooded by groundwater. It has been for 2,000 years. A literal river of the dead, sealed beneath the city, a Styx you can't cross, a level of the underworld that you simply cannot reach. I think that's the most poetic thing that I've encountered while researching this episode. And a donkey found it. If Paris is the most famous catacomb system and Rome is the most sacred, then Odessa, Ukraine, is the most dangerous. At approximately 2,500 kilometers, the Odessa Catacombs are the largest in the world. To put that in context, if you stretch the Paris Catacombs end to end, they span the length of Manhattan. If you stretched Odessa's, they'd cross 3 countries. And here is the critical difference between Odessa and everywhere else we visited tonight. There is no map. These tunnels were not carved by church or municipality or any organized body. They were mined illegally by private landowners in the 19th century for taquina, a yellow limestone used to build a city above. Because each section was privately dug, no one ever assembled a master plan. No central blueprint exists. The rock is distinctive, a warm amber yellow, and because everything looks identical in every direction, navigation becomes an art form. Experienced explorers use methods they guard like secrets, specifically rock stacking patterns. Scented oils on the walls, chalk marks that they immediately know could be rubbed out by someone who wants you lost. And here is the derail that keeps me awake at night. The limestone in Odessa is so porous that it absorbs sound. You could be standing 20 feet from another person. You could be screaming, and if they are around a corner, you could be screaming. You could be standing at an exit screaming, and no one on the surface would hear you. During World War II, when Nazis occupied Odessa, Soviet partisans didn't retreat, they went down. They moved into the Yellow Labyrinth and they did not come back up. They built schools underground, they built hospitals, they built a theater. They cooked food using smoke traps, winding chimneys connected to the house foundations above so that the smoke would rise through normal chimneys and look to German soldiers on the surface like the ordinary smoke of an empty, occupied house. They lived like this for months, some for longer, coming up only to strike, snipers vanishing into the earth after a single shot, reappearing a kilometer away, unreachable, invisible. The city above thought it was holding the city below. The city below was holding the city above. The modern explorers who go into Odessa's tunnels still find their traces. Newspapers from the 1940s, half-drunk bottles of wine, equipment perfectly preserved in the dry air. Small things that were never retrieved because the people who left them never came back. No episode about Odessa would be complete without the story of Masha. In 2005, so the story goes, a group of teenagers entered the Odessa Catacombs for a New Year's Eve party. When they emerged, one girl, Masha, did not come with them. Search parties went in. They heard voices behind walls. They couldn't find her. Her photo circulated online. A body found somewhere deep in the tunnels. Local authorities and experienced diggers largely considered the story a fabrication, the body possibly staged, the voices, the acoustic phenomenon of limestone carrying sound from distant chambers. And yet, in certain junctions of the Odessa tunnels, explorers now leave offerings, bottles of water, candy, small things, placed in intersections where people think she might have been. An internet myth, born online, debated and debunked, has become a folk ritual. People who don't believe the story leave something behind, just in case. That's how legends work. They don't need to be true to become real. We could spend 20 episodes down here, but let me give you the rapid fire tour because the world beneath us is stranger than you know. Dublin, the Crusaders' stolen head. St. Michan's Church in Dublin has vaults beneath it that contains mummies, not chemically treated, not internationally preserved. The magnesium-rich limestone walls and the dry air did it naturally. Bodies just stopped decaying. The most famous is a man known only as the Crusader. He was over 6 feet tall, remarkable for his era. His legs were broken and folded behind him so he could fit into a coffin that was too small. Think about that. He was too big for desk furniture, so they just adjusted him. In 2019, vandals broke in. They decapitated several of the mummies. The Crusader's head was later recovered. Someone stole a medieval dead man's head and then gave it back. I have so many questions. The Czech Republic, the chandelier. The Sedlec Osuri in Kutna Hora is decorated almost entirely with human bones, bone garlands, bone coats of arms, bone everything, and in the center, a chandelier that contains at least one of every single bone in a human body. Every single bone. Someone sat down with an anatomy textbook and a pile of 14th century skeletons and made sure every bone was represented. That level of commitment to a theme is something I generally respect. Same place, the Czech Republic again. The ghost city of Nojmo. The Nojmo catacombs weren't built for burial. They were defensive weapons. In the 14th century, when invaders approached the city, the entire population would vanish underground. They left their fires burning, smoke rising from chimneys. The city, to any approaching army, looks inhabited by ghosts, and the tunnels themselves were engineered to to end lives. Slides that ended in hidden pits, trapdoors over flooded lower levels, passages so narrow that armored soldiers couldn't turn around, meaning a single defender with a spear could hold an entire corridor. An invisible city, a labyrinth of death, a ghost town that was pretending to be haunted to keep the living out. Psychological warfare, 14th century style. Greece, the pirate tunnels. The catacombs of Milos dates to the 1st century. Among the oldest Christian catacombs on Earth, over 8,000 people are estimated to be buried here. In family vaults where bodies were simply stacked. For centuries after their use as a burial sites, Mediterranean pirates used these tunnels as hideouts. They didn't just shelter there, they looted them. They looted the graves, stripped the jewelry, stole the marble tombstone, and sold them as building materials. There are also dead-end hallways, corridors that go nowhere, designed to trap Roman soldiers in total darkness. The Christians know which turns to make. The soldiers would follow them in and then find themselves alone, surrounded in the ancient dead with no light, in a dead end. The architecture of the early church contained literal death traps. I feel like that's undersold in Sunday school. Naples, the Valley of the Dead. The San Gennaro Catacombs contain some of the earliest Christian arts in existence, and one fresco in particular is extraordinary. A painted portrait of a family, a man named Theotokos, his wife and daughter. But researchers discovered something strange upon closer inspection. The fresco had been repainted multiple times. Each time a family member ended, someone came back down and added their face to the painting. Over decades, building a portrait of an entire family, assembled piece by piece through grief. These catacombs are also enormous. Not the cramped Roman tunnels, but vast, airy spaces containing an actual underground basilica, a bishop's chair, an altar, all carved from volcanic rock. During World War II, when Allied bombs fell on Naples, thousands of civilians moved in. They set up bunk beds among the 4th century graves. They built kitchens. They lived for weeks alongside the 1,500-year-old dead. The dead sheltered the living. The ancient city held a modern one. Malta, the Agape tables. St. Paul's Catacombs in Rabat, Malta, are extraordinary for one reason. Christians, Jews, and pagans were buried here side by side. In the ancient world, that was essentially unheard of. But the legend I want to leave you with is this. In the catacombs, there are circular stones tables called agape tables, love feast tables, where in antiquity, mourners would eat a ritual meal in the presence of the dead, communing with their ancestors, sharing food at the threshold between worlds. The legend says, leave food on the table at night, and ancestors will leave a sign of their favor. But eat from the table yourself, and you will be called to join within the year. I'll bring my own snacks. We started tonight in Paris, the city that ran out of places that put its dead and chose to make them beautiful. We visited Rome, where faithful built an underground city so they could rest together in sacred rock. We stood in front of 2,000-year-old Palermo. We stood in front of a 2-year-old girl in Palermo who had been sleeping for over a century and who, I want to be clear about this, still looks like she could wake up. We fell into Egypt with a donkey. We got lost in Ukraine with ghost named Masha. We had a medieval skull stolen and returned in Dublin. We watched a 14th century city vanish underground and smoke convince an army it was haunted. And in Malta, we left the food. Here's what I keep coming back to. Every catacomb on Earth, from Paris to Palermo, from Rome to Odessa, was built by people who refused to simply let go. People who could not accept that death was the end of a relationship, that the body was just waste to be managed, that love expired at the moment the heart did. They built underground cities so their dead could stay close. They dressed them in silk. They visited them on Sundays. They repainted their faces. They left them food. They smashed jars at the threshold so they wouldn't carry grief back into the light. They built 6 million bones into an altars. And they left behind a note that said, "Don't search." But we did. We always do. Because the most human impulse there is, more than fear, more than faith, more than love, is curiosity. The need to go down, to open a door, to hold up light in the dark and say, "Who's there?" The answer tonight was 6 million voices. And they said, "We're still here." This has been the Phantom Navigator. I'm your host. Stay curious, stay brave, and for the love of everything, don't go underground alone. If you found something in tonight's episode that kept you up, or if you've been to any of these places and have a story of your own, go ahead and find me on the Facebook page. Email me at phantomnavigatorpodcast@gmail.com or wherever you listen to podcasts, and leave us a review. Keep your secrets underground where they belong. Until next time.